Now in today's video, we're going to talk about recreating Ed Sheeran's live looping setup. And we're going to break this video down into two parts: the equipment that you need and also how you can set this equipment up in the correct way, just like Ed Sheeran does. So let's first talk about the actual physical equipment that you need in order to recreate Ed Sheeran's live looping setup. And we're going to break this part down into three different categories. We're going to take a look at the loop pedal, the vocal microphones, and then we're also going to take a look at the guitar of choice and why Ed Sheeran uses a specific style of guitar. Now let's first talk about the most important and essential part of the live looping setup, which is obviously the loop station. Now Ed Sheeran has a custom-built, purpose-built loop pedal which is called the Chewy Monster. He's got the Chewy Monster 1 and also the Chewy Monster 2. Now this custom-made loop pedal is actually running off of a computer. It's got this software that's running off a laptop called Mobius. And Mobius is this super versatile live looping software which is free that you can download off the internet. You can do some crazy stuff with it. I played about with it in the past. It's very, very complicated, but it is very, very versatile. Now in today's video, we're not going to talk about Mobius because it's just too complicated in general, and Ed Sheeran has a full production team that programs the loop pedal for him. So for an average consumer, that's not the route that you want to go down. And we're going to talk about some consumer options instead. Now, the interesting thing about Ed Sheeran's loop pedal is obviously it's running this software called Mobius, which is phenomenal, but he's actually running this software inside of Ableton Live. So his entire live looping rig is actually running inside of Ableton Live with this Mobius software, which gives him a plethora of audio routing options and also a lot of versatility in how the loop pedal can actually operate within his workflow. Now, there's two consumer loop pedals that really help you try and recreate the essence of Ed Sheeran's workflow, and those are the Boss RC300 and the Headrush Looper Board. Now, I want to talk about which loop pedal I think is best for this setup, and if you want to learn more about both of these loop pedals in detail, then check out my comparison video over here. Now, there's specific reasons why you may actually want to go with the Boss RC300. One, the Boss RC300 is a lot more cost effective. It's almost half the price of the Headrush Looper Board, but also it lends itself to a much more user-friendly experience straight out of the box. So if you're new to looping or you've dabbled with it and you're a very early on beginner looking to upgrade your setup, I'd highly suggest going for the Boss RC300 due to it being much less overwhelming and it just working straight out of the box. Now, the specific scenarios where the Headrush Looper Board allows you to pretty much 90% recreate Ed Sheeran's loop track. Not only does it have 4 loop tracks, but it also has very versatile audio routing options, just like Ed Sheeran has running his laptop with Ableton Live and the Mobius software. Now, these audio routing options are the fact that we can specifically assign certain instruments to certain loop tracks. So for example, we can have a guitar loop track, a drum loop track, and a vocal loop track, and then an old loop track. So all of the instruments are on that loop track, which is exactly how Ed Sheeran's Chewy Monster is set up. He has a specific track for his guitar, a specific track for the drums, which obviously he creates on his guitar, a specific track for his vocal microphone, and then also his 4th track is a mix of all of the instruments so he can loop them all simultaneously. Now in today's video, I'm actually going to be using the Headrush Looper Board so I can demonstrate the most advanced Ed Sheeran live looping setup you could possibly create. So I'm going to literally show you exactly how he sets it up with input specific tracks because the Headrush Looper Board allows us to do that. So this right here, if you've never seen a Headrush Looper Board, this is a Headrush Looper Board. And I actually did an unboxing video recently that you can check out over here if you want to learn about some of the specs and some of the key things that I addressed in that video. Now, the really cool thing about this Looper Board is it's got a touch screen. So I can use this touch screen to navigate and adjust all of the settings. You can see here there's lots of different settings menus that we can actually delve into. And I've got a full, complete, ultimate guide that's linked in the description down below if you pick up this loop pedal and you want to learn more about each of these settings. Now, the one we're actually specifically going to take a look at is the audio routing tab over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to specifically route each of the inputs to each loop track. Now, the really cool thing about the Headrush Looper Board is we have 4 individual instrument inputs. So that means we can plug into 4 separate instruments and route those to our loop pedal tracks. Unlike on the Boss RC300, where we're very restricted what we can input. We essentially only have 3 inputs on that loop pedal, and whatever is inputted into the loop pedal, that goes to every single loop track. So we're quite restricted with the actual setups that we can do. So what we're going to do is we are going to go down to this tab over here, which is track. Now, inside of the track tab, we have the option to define which inputs will go to each loop track, and then also where each loop track will be outputted, because once again, the headrush looper board has a ton of outputs. It has 4 outputs plus a headphone out, so there's a plethora of ways we can actually route the audio, not only coming into the loop pedal, but also routing the audio coming out of the loop pedal, which just gives us insane flexibility. Now, I'm just going to keep it dead simple, and I'm going to output all of my loop tracks via outputs 1 plus 2, which is just, you know, the 2 little jacks on the back of the loop pedal. And now let's talk about actually inputting the audio. So on track 1, I'm going to set up track 1 to be my acoustic guitar track, and then track 2 is going to be my drum track, and I want to set up track 3 to be my vocal loop track, and then track 4 is going to be my all instruments track. So everything plugged into loop pedal will be able to be looped at once on that track. So first off, I'm going to plug my acoustic guitar into input 1 on my headrush looper board. So I'm going to specifically assign input 1 only to be on track 1 over here. So we'll disable input 2 and we'll have it outputting via those jacks there. Now on the headrush, we can actually rename the tracks for reference purposes, keep things organized so we know what we've actually set up on each of the loops. So we can double tap on the timeline view, we go to timeline and we double track on the track name, and now we can rename this. So I'm going to call this guitar, and then that is that renamed. And then while we're here, I'll rename track 2 to be drums, track 3 can be vocals, and then track 4 we'll put down as all, because we want all of our instruments on that track. And let's go back to our audio tab. Now what we're going to do is I'm actually going to plug in my microphone into input 2. So for the vocals, we're going to select input 2, and for the drums, because I'm going to be doing my drums on my acoustic guitar, that's obviously going to be input 1 as well. And then for the final one, which is all, we're just going to select every single loop track option. And now we have theoretically a very similar setup to how Ed Sheeran loops on his Chewy Monster loop station, which is really fun. Now there is a basic option of a loop pedal that you can actually choose if either of these 2 loop stations I've mentioned so far are a little bit overwhelming, and that's actually the Boss RC30. Now this is an updated version of the loop pedal that Ed Sheeran actually began looping with, and it's a fantastic loop pedal. Yeah, it's a little bit old at this point, audio quality isn't the best, but it's a beautiful place to start, and in fact it was my first ever loop pedal. So 2-track loop station, beautiful huge foot switches so you can get used to clicking the foot switches and getting your timing down and on point. Now the reason why Ed Sheeran has a 2 microphone setup is because he has one microphone, which is his primary singing microphone, which is completely independent from his loop pedal. So when he sings and he's recording on his loop pedal through this mic, it's not going to record into his loop station. And then the second microphone is his vocal looping mic. So this plugs into his loop pedal, and whenever he's recording, he can record backing vocals, harmonies, he can do all of his vocal looping on the secondary mic. Now for the average consumer, I suggest for your secondary microphone going for this style of mic. This is a Shure FM57 style microphone, but the key feature it has is a kill switch. And the beautiful thing about the kill switch is we can activate the microphone when we want to actually sing into it and record that into our loop pedal. And then when we don't want to record anything through our microphone, we can mute it and switch it off. And then that means no unwanted noise will be recorded into our loop pedal. Because the problem is, if you use this style of microphone into a standard loop pedal, what's going to happen is whenever you're recording just your guitar or your drum beat, that's also going to be recorded through the microphone along with all of the room noise and the crowd cheering and talking and things, and it's going to eventually make your loop sound a little bit messy, but potentially cause feedback because it's just recording and recording room noise, and it gets a little bit too much constantly going through the loop. Now I actually have a detailed microphone type comparison video where I talk about the different styles of microphones and which is best suited for live looping in particular. That you can check out over here if you want to learn some more information. And additionally, if you want to learn about Ed Sheeran's microphone setup in greater detail, I also have a video over here talking about his microphone to microphone setup in greater depth. So let's now talk about the reason why Ed Sheeran actually uses the specific style of guitar that he does. Now he says obviously, you know, it's a small guitar, it looks cool and it makes him look bigger, but there's actually a performance reason why he uses the smaller body. Now obviously now he uses much fancier brands of guitars like Loden guitars. He has his new custom range out there, but the premise of the guitar body still remains the same from his initial guitar, which was the Martin LX1E, which I have here. Now the way Ed Sheeran creates his drums is obviously he hits the strings for his bass, strikes the strings for his snare, and then does all the other stuff with hi-hats on the strings. Now, the reason why the small body on the acoustic guitar lends itself well to this technique is the fact it reduces the resonance and feedback of him hitting the guitar body. Because if you were to strike the strings like he does for that kick drum on a huge hummingbird style guitar, very big bodied guitar, that's going to cause a lot of air to bounce around within the actual acoustic guitar body, lots of resonance bouncing around, and it also amplifies because the guitar body is so big, so every time he strikes his strings and does his kicks on it, that's just going to intensify with the actual feedback on the guitar body, which then makes his loop sound a little bit muddy because there's all this air bouncing around inside of the acoustic guitar while he's hitting it. But it also could cause feedback because it's getting worse and worse and worse as he progressively plays on it. The next problem is as well, as you start to play on bigger stages or festival stages where there's lots of subwoofers in the actual floor of the stage and it's a little bit overkill on the bass front, that too also causes more feedback in the larger guitar body, and when you're hitting it and things like that, it's not a very nice recipe. The next thing is as well, because the body's so small, this reduces obviously the amount of air that bounces around inside of it because it's much smaller, and this creates a much tighter sounding kick as opposed to a very airy and bouncing and a loose sounding kick that you would get from a larger guitar body. So that's actually the reason why he uses these smaller guitar shapes. And even though he no longer uses Martin guitars and he's using them super fancy Loden brands, you can actually tell the premise of the guitar shapes are fundamentally the same as the smaller guitars he previously used to use back in the day, because they're still pretty small. Now, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and also consider subscribing because I upload 3 videos just like this one every single week. And if you want to learn more about the Boss RC300 or the Headrush looper board, then check out the links in the description down below for my ultimate guides, where I take you through literally every single setting on the 2 loop stations. But as always, I've been Ben Rollins. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.